Okay, if everybody would like to take a seat, we'll get started. So welcome everybody to this feedback meeting that we had planned for the fire. I'd like to acknowledge the Northern Rockies Administrative Center located in the heart of the traditional territory of the Dene, the Cree, and the Dunnezah people of the Fort Nelson and Prophet River First Nations. We further recognize the rights that are provided by our treaty, and we celebrate the contributions and enduring presence of the Métis people that have been here for a long time. So, next slide, please. So what this meeting is, the meeting is focused on incident response, evacuation, emergency support services, and community re-entry. We know that there's questions out there with respect to recovery, wildfire resiliency, and related topics. Those will go on for a long time, and it is our intent to have another series of focused meetings to discuss those topics specifically. But tonight, in the few hours that we have, we really want to talk about the evacuation, your experience with the support services that you got in the host communities, and then your experience coming back to the community. Our goal is to learn from what you have to offer and to improve our emergency response strategies in the future. This meeting is being live streamed, so thank you to everybody in the room who came, and thank you for everybody who is attending online. I need to acknowledge that there were extraordinary challenges we've all faced during this evacuation. It was a traumatic event for our community. It's been a tough time for everybody. And I'm deeply grateful for the common sense that all of you showed, for your resilience and your cooperation throughout the entirety of this situation. My sad thoughts go out to those who lost their homes and who had damage to their properties. I also like to send my deepest condolences to the Southwick family as they experienced the loss of Blaine while all this was going on. So tonight's meeting will begin with some presentations because we think information will help to solve some of the questions that many of you may have. We've got presentations from the BC Wildfire Service. I'm not going to get that right. It's been a month that I'm still calling it the Wildlife Service. Wildfire Service. We want to address the roles and responsibilities that all of the organizations have, because we all have lanes we have to follow. And I think there's some misunderstanding with respect to where those lanes cross over and the impacted decisions that get made. We'll go through a timeline of evacuation, and we have a small video that we've been prepared with respect to the actual evacuation order and the conditions on the ground at the time. We will talk about evacuation support services, and we'll talk about the re-entry. So I would like to introduce, I guess, first of all, our counselors. I know Councillor Inax is in the audience. Councillor Gerwing, I think, is out there as well. Councillor Souls, Councillor Andrews, and Councillor Roper. I think Councillor Dickey is away. Yeah, she's not in the room. I would like to introduce Todd Flanagan, who's the outgoing incident command for BC Wildfire Service. Mark Healy is the incoming incident command for the Wildfire Service, and our zone fire officer, Griffin Redmond. Online, I think we have the RCMP. We have Chief Superintendent Brian Edmonds, Inspector Aaron Spurl, Staff Sergeant Jim Fensky, and Sergeant Jamie Moffett. From our own Northern Rockies Fire and Rescue, Chief Childs and Deputy Chief Shepard. From the NRM, we have Scott Barry as our CAO, and we have Aaron LaVale, who was our Emergency Operations Director for our EOC. And then Lisa Thompson is here as well, who was our Director of Planning, and she was also the EOC Planning Section Head. And from the Ministry of Energy, Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, Heather McRae, who's the Regional Manager for the Northeast region. Thank you, everybody. So in order to participate, so you can view this meeting live, northernrockies.ca/councilcast. It's being hosted on our Zoom platform at northernrockies.ca/Zoom. We'll take questions from the floor. We do have runners with the microphone, and we'll limit the amount of time each person has. So hopefully we can get through all the questions in the room. If you think or worried you're going to forget your questions, we've got pens and sticky notes there if you want to grab one and write your question down. And of course, those participating online can ask their questions by email to communications@northernrockies.ca or tap into the chat function, and we'll do our best to get your questions answered. So we'll get right into it. I'll invite Todd and Mark for a current situation update and an overview of the roles and responsibilities related to the incident.
Good afternoon. Todd Flanagan, been in Port Nelson for the last 12 days. And to start off, we'll go over the roles and responsibilities of BC Wildfire. I think next slide, please. BC Wildfire jurisdiction covers all BC parks, all Crown lands and private lands, but does not include boundaries of local governments that have a forest fire prevention bylaw or serviced by a fire department. BCWS speaks directly about wildfires, fire status updates and operations, and is responsible for disseminating wildfire updates to local governments, stakeholders, First Nations, and the public. In the event of an immediate threat to public safety, BCWS can authorize an immediate tactical evacuation of the affected area. So that speaks for itself. BCWS does provide only recommendations to local authorities for alerts and orders. Any questions on that? To start moving forward, there's a North Peace Complex. So an area that I have, we're monitoring all the wildfires in that area. So we're about 250,000 hectares. So 9 fires, some of the majors were Parker Lake and Patry Creek to the north. We've got an incident management team here, somewhere about 210 firefighters, 14 helicopters, 8 danger tree fallers, 6 pieces of heavy equipment, and then lots of local service providers that help run the camp. To talk about a couple of fires, we'll start with 267 since it's up there. Fire 207, the Patry. 267 Parker Lake, that's up there on the board. It's about 12,000 hectares. We all know where it burnt. Currently, we have somewhere around 30 firefighters working the perimeter. We have helicopter scanning has gone on for the last 2 nights, as well as drone scanning. We have a really secured perimeter all around it. We are going to see or continue to see fire throughout it. Fires burning in the peat. We have a lot of fire internal that's unsafe to put our firefighters. We're going to see smoke on that, for the next couple of weeks for sure. But that smoke that we see is going to be all internal and managed. We're not walking away from this fire. We are going to continue to monitor, fight, and have people assess and respond to anything we see in along the Parker Lake fire. Some of the other fires of note would be fire 207 to the north. So that fire to the north, before the Parker Lake fire, that was one of the holdover fires. So the Parker Lake fire, fire 207, BC Wildfire Service dispatched an IMT to handle that fire. So that was why we got an IMT and resources coming up to start the action that we had. Currently, we probably have about 120, 130 firefighters on there. For an update, we have the south flank, if I may call it the south flank, secured. We are working, same thing. We're flying perimeters, scanning, hitting hot spots. There's one small section we're working on to tie it up. The west flank, we've got it buttoned up and control points in and along. And the east flank, yes, exactly. We're all the way up and along to the very top, just above the cursor there. So we've got a big horseshoe or a U shape around that fire. We're feeling really comfortable with that fire. And we're going to continue to work our objectives on that fire. We can move over to fire 228. So basically east of town. Fire 228, we're working some values on the east side. We're in conjunction with the road, so up and down to protect some values that have been identified to the west. And then any growth to the south that will threaten the power line. We have resources working on several different strategic spots there to stop all growth. I can say currently our objectives haven't been met. Where camp is about 400 people strong. You know, by the time we hit overhead team and all supporting personnel. And we're going to continue to be here till we feel secure that all our objectives are met here in the community. Next slide, please. Parker Lake wildfire. We'll talk about the initial response in a bit. Next slide, please. Claims. So BC Wildfire Service has a claims section. So claims for us is any damage that we've done to any damage that a firefighter or our agency has done to private property. We do have a claims program to fix and repair. So there is an email address there. So if we went through your fence with a dozer, if we have damaged any private land and put a windrow there or a fire guard, you reach out to BCWS claims. In conjunction with us, we will make sure that your claims push through and accepted. So we haven't had a lot of response from the community or claims from the community. So that's why I'm here talking about BCWS claims. I hope you guys reach out for anybody that we've damaged property. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I guess it's slide 7, please. So there are roles and responsibilities. BC Wildfire has said their role is to work on the wildfires, to try to put them out, try to keep them contained, keep them away from communities. That's their role. Community's role is threefold. Really, we've got the role of council, we've got the role of our emergency operations center, and we've got our firefighters who do structural firefighting and assist with the BC Wildfire Service. So from council's perspective, we are for the most part hands off. It's our job to give local authority policy direction. So to the Emergency Operations Center. So we are the policy directors of the community. And so if there needs to be a policy change or a policy that has not been developed, that's part of our role, is to pull that together if the EOC is looking to us for policy direction. Next is to issue the legislative tools. So the state of local emergency, the evacuation alert, and the evacuation order comes under our responsibility as council. We're there to authorize any extraordinary response or recovery expenses that are not eligible for funding by the province. So it's on us and our community to figure out how we might have to change the budget or how we might have to come up with the resources if there's an extraordinary cost that's not covered by the province. That's part of our role. And then provide direction on the strategic business continuity. In this particular case, we had to do that. You know, on Sunday, the 12th, I guess, we had to move our entire operations, which is not just the Emergency Operations Center, but it's actually the continuity, business continuity of the business of the municipality and the governance of the municipality. So I meant all servers, all files, all critical files, all the equipment needed to be moved to Pink Mountain. And the staff did that and had it up and running again by Monday afternoon at 2 or 2:30. So that's the role of council. We really are a strategic governance policy group that gives direction when we're asked to give that direction. So the RCMP, are they on? Their slide is the next slide.
Sorry, can you hear me?
There we go. We can hear you now.
Okay. So yeah, I can speak to this slide. We put it together with our team led by Jamie Moffett. So in this particular instance and other wildfire getting feedback there. Well, that's better. So our first priority is public safety. As you can see in the first bullet, we coordinated door-to-door notifications when the evacuation order was first issued. Unfortunately, we didn't have the assistance of our search and rescue at the time, so our members were tasked fully with doing that. So they went and notified as many residents as they could. They went back to a number of residents multiple times to make sure that people are aware of the order and the need to evacuate. The other aspect we did is we looked at bringing in assistance via resources, physical assets into Port Nelson. We enacted our business continuity plan, which saw us move police operations to Fort St. John, along with, as you mentioned earlier, critical files, exhibits, assets that we were able to remove from the community. And then throughout this, we liaised with the EOC to make sure that we fulfilled our role and were working in partnership with all the agencies. And up until the evacuation order, and as soon as it was, we were able to get essential services in there, we maintained a presence, a public safety presence in the community, again, to ensure the safety of persons and property within the community. So that's in an overview our position and our duties and responsibilities during this incident.
And we mitigate structure fires, brush fires, vehicle fires, any fires within that fire protection area. And you can tell there's times where Northern Rockies Fire Rescue is often working with our partners, the BC Wildfire Service. Wildland urban interface fires are highly complex and dynamic incidents where it is necessary to combine strategies and tactics involving wildland firefighting, structural firefighting, and specialized wildland urban interface firefighting. And as you will see throughout this evening, how both Northern Rockies Fire Rescue and the BC Wildfire Service work together on the Parker Lake fire. So to the next slide, I'm just going to give you a rough timeline and what Northern Rockies Fire Rescue encountered on Friday, May the 10th. So on Friday, May the 10th, it was a hot, warm, windy, dry day. Because we knew there was a wind event happening in our fire protection area, we were out on patrols with our on-duty crew. And we were just patrolling our fire protection area, checking for any abandoned campfires that we get quite a bit, any spot fires that could be out there from ATVs, quads, stuff like that. Looking for down power lines, down trees, just anything that could cause a fire that day. So in between doing patrols, we were running some other emergency calls. So our duty crew was on a public service call at the time. And myself and my deputy fire chief, Hayward Shepherd, we were out doing patrols. When at 15:31, our fire dispatch received a call for a brush fire at mile 310 or mile 311 on the Alaska Highway. At around 15:45, one of the first firefighters arrived on scene to report a large grass and brush fire at mile 310. While the deputy fire chief and myself did a quick size up of the incident and established traffic control of the fire. And as you will see in this short video, what we encountered. So if you want to play the video real quick. let's concentrate on some side of these guys. So what that video doesn't show is the fire is also burning on the south side of the highway with the same fire behavior with grass on fire, trees on fire, and there were 2 structures on fire on the south side of the highway. Northern Rockies Fire Rescue was starting to do a direct attack on this fire and zero visibility with hot embers and thick black smoke covering the Alaska Highway. The fire intensity was too high for firefighters to perform a direct attack, and the fire just moved faster down the road from us, and we weren't effective to keep up to the fire. It kept traveling down the highway. This is when we made a decision to contact our fire dispatch and request BC Wildfire Service assistance with firefighters and air support. The decision was made that Northern Rockies Fire Rescue had to switch to an indirect attack well ahead of the fire, aiming to box this fire in. So we moved our operations to the Radar Road and the Valley View intersection. Once we got our command post set up and our firefighters all accounted for, Northern Rockies fire rescue personnel then did the fire front follow through, and they went back to mile 311 and worked their way from mile 311 down to mile 308, 306, just doing fire follow through, putting out any hot spots, any structure fires that they encountered, and just trying to mitigate any hot embers and sparks that were blowing around everywhere. So at this time around, it was around 1800 or so, shortly after, Northern Rockies Fire Rescue Incident Command advised dispatch that the fire is moving too fast for us to box in, and we were requesting the town to be evacuated. Northern Rockies Fire Rescue also requested our dispatch to contact Radar Road to get us some machines so they could start conducting fuel breaks from Radar Road over to the pipeline and down to the west side of Walsh Road. Forestry fire crews, along with Northern Rockies rescue fire crews, deployed the Northern Rockies structure protection trailer to start prepping and defending structures at mile 306, Walsh Road, the Alaska Highway, and Valley View. In our structure protection branch, we had firefighters from different areas of the province. There was around 70 firefighters for structure protection, and some of the communities and cities that sent us assistance was Fort St. John Fire Rescue, Charlie Lake Fire Rescue, Taylor Fire Rescue, Red Rock, Shuswap, Houston, Blackpool, Ferndale, and Tabor Fire Rescue, Mackenzie Fire Department, Burns Lake, Telquah, Seneca, and Ryder Ventures out of the Okanagan. So we had roughly 70 firefighters along with structure protection specialists to assist us doing structure protection along the Alaska Highway for the first 24 hours of the incident. Right now, I'll just hand it back over. So that's just the rundown of Friday night for us.
Hi, everyone. As the mayor mentioned, my name is Erin LaVale, and I am the Deputy CAO for the Northern Rockies. I am also the Emergency Program Coordinator, and for this incident, I spent most of my days acting as the EOC Director. So I'm going to cover off, first off, just some of the roles and responsibilities for the EOC. But before I sort of begin my portion of the presentation, I want to draw your attention to that small little graphic on the screen. And I think there's a small version down in front. And it is the standard response goals for BC emergency management. So one of the first standard response goals is the safety and health of responders. And I think that's always critical to have that in the forefront of our minds. The other response goals are listed there in priority order, but it includes things like saving lives, reducing suffering, protecting public health, protecting critical infrastructure, protecting property, the environment, and reducing economic and social losses. While it is a simple list, it is a very important list. It is in priority order, and they are the response goals for every decision that is made within the EOC and within all responding agencies which operate under the BC Emergency Response Management System. So EOC as I'm going to refer to it, stands for Emergency Operations Center, and it's a term which is used in many industries. And for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to be using it as it relates to local government. So starting with our broad role and responsibilities, we do not manage the incident. That's James's job. That's Todd's job and Mark's job, Griffin's job. We coordinate, we support them. So we help in that response effort. We are the group also through which the mayor mentioned our SOLs, alerts, and orders. We are the group which the local authority issues those legislative tools. We provide policy and strategic direction on actions which may impact safety, public health, and critical infrastructure. We are the getters of things. So we are resource acquisition. If James wants 100 rolls of 50-foot forestry hose, we get him 100 rolls of 50-foot forestry hose. That is our job. We coordinate with sporting agencies, and we have a team that takes care of internal and external communications as well, ensuring that residents and impacted parties are all kept up to date. Next slide. So on the next batch of slides are going to include a brief summary of just some of the EOC activities that went on. I've included some key milestone events and decisions. It's not every event and decision, but it's some of those key ones that we felt that individuals, residents would be interested in and wanted to know more about. If the decision that you are wondering about or have a question on is not listed, please feel free to still ask about it. We wanted to keep the presentation to a decent size, and we couldn't include everything or we would be here for a long time. So please note that also, as this presentation goes through, it is in a timeline format, but please know that a lot of these activities and actions ran concurrently, so they often occurred at the same time. If there was a key decision or a meeting that occurred, we did try to include that decision point on a slide and include the inputs that were considered into making that decision. For the decision to evacuate the community, I will refer everyone back to Chief Child's summary of the events. And while the recommendation to evacuate the community was communicated to us from BC Wildfire, the recommendation originated within the entire fire response that was led by Chief Childs. We've been asked, I'm sure as many of the folks here have been asked, who made that decision? And I think it's very important for everyone to realize that a decision of that magnitude is vetted through several agencies. And in this instance, those included Northern Rockies Fire Rescue, BC Wildfire, the province, and finally the EOC. So the first slide is talking about May 10th. As Chief Childs already mentioned, we were advised of the out of control wildfire west of the community around 3:40. In order to support his tactical evacuation of the properties west of the community, we issued a voyant alert at 4:19. That voyant alert delivered about 120 notifications. Shortly thereafter, it was about an hour and a half. An emergency meeting was held by BC Wildfire. It's hosted by BC Wildfire and EMCR. And the EOC staff of both the Northern Rockies and Fort Nelson First Nations were advised that they were recommending an evacuation of the entire community, including Fort Nelson First Nation IR number 2. The EOC began communicating the evacuation order shortly after 7 p.m. And the first communications occurred on our social media channels. We've had some questions come out as to why the order came out on social media first. And I just wanted to talk about that. The communication of this order is one of those tasks that occurred concurrently. So social media is quick. It reaches a lot of people. So while one of our EOC staff is preparing the voyant alert and working through a process to get our broadcast intrusive alert out, another staff member got the message out the quickest way possible, which happened to be social media. So for our voyant alert, that was issued at 6:57 p.m. and it delivered 1,268 notifications. It was followed shortly after by a broadcast intrusive and wireless intrusive alert, and that's a provincial tool that we have at our disposal. And that was issued for the communities of Fort Nelson and Fort Nelson First Nation, and that was issued at 7:16. About the same time, the RCMP began their door-to-door notification process. And later that evening at about 10:30, the official states of local emergency and evacuation orders for both communities were issued. And EOC activities continued that evening into the early hours of the next day. May 11th is a critical day for decisions. Weather models started to predict a shift in the upcoming days in terms of wind direction and speed. And while winds were fairly calm on May 11th, winds were predicted to become much stronger within the next 24 to 36 hours. These winds, we were told, were going to continue to drive the fire towards the community and start to steer it towards the Musqueam Heights, the gasoline alley area. So in addition to working with our entire team on the maintenance of essential critical infrastructure, including water and communications, the Parker Lake wildfire, of course, was continuing to be driven towards the community. On that day, BC Wildfire advised us that our EOC and our EOC staff should be relocated outside of the community within the next 24 to 36 hours. We had a really nice fellow in our EOC that was there representing BC Wildfire, and he was a fire behavioral specialist. He showed us the next slide, and we're going to show it to you, but I need to preface a little bit about this slide. So he wanted to let us know that the fire growth predicted was without any fire suppression efforts. So he is a fire behaviorist. I don't know if he was an analyst or a specialist or a technician, but he was a very nice young man. But he was very, very succinct in letting us know that this fire growth would be without any fire suppression efforts. So I want to be true to his word and convey that to you as well. So this is what we were shown on May 11th in the EOC, and it was the fire predicted growth. And he said it was could overwhelm the entire community. So this was the very next day after that evacuation order went out. So he said, you can see on the slide, you can see the yellow outline and you can see the red outline. Picking my glasses down. The yellow outline is May 12th and the red outline is May 13th. So this was the predicted fire growth with the winds and the current ground conditions. So May 12th, given that information, our EOC now had two different tasks. We had to not only support our resident and our incident response teams, but we now had to secure and relocate the municipality. So we needed to relocate critical municipal equipment and supplies associated with the operation and continued governance of the municipality. On May 12th, there was conversations occurring between the incident response agencies, and fire growth trigger points were established for the evacuation of all non-essential first responder personnel. At this point, the fire was about 2.5 kilometers from the edge of town. The growth was toward Musqueam Heights, and spot fires were now occurring on the south side of the Musqueam River. Late on May 12th, EOC staff evacuated the community and we evacuated to Pink Mountain. As was communicated just before we left, during the evacuation, our communications did go down. We needed to remove all the critical file and network servers from our town hall, which included our email system and included our ability to edit our website. It included a lot of our communications. So that we had about a 12-hour period where we were unable to communicate. On May 13th, the remote EOC was established at Pink Mountain, and as the mayor said, we were back up and running just around 2 o'clock. Throughout May 12th and 13th, the fire growth on the Parker Lake fire and the Patrick Creek fire continued to be driven by those northwest winds. And on the recommendation of BC Wildfire, on the early morning on May 13th, we did a second joint expanded evacuation order. And it was issued encompassing the Patrick Creek fire, so to the fire north on 77, and to the just a bit Highway 97 to the south, up to the North River Midstream gas plant. Midday on May 13th, sorry, the Parker Lake fire reached the established trigger point, and all non-essential first responder personnel were ordered to evacuate the community. With the south route threatened during the afternoon of May 13th, EOC staff did call residents who were known to have advised the RCMP of their refusal to evacuate. We did call a number of residents, and we had a few more that wished to evacuate. So we sent people back into the community to evacuate those residents. Next slide. The next two slides, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, because I am not a fire behavioral specialist. So I need one of them.
Well, I'm also not a fire behavior specialist, but I was working with Aaron and several others on those days as a liaison for BC Wildfire. And so this slide here is taken from, it's called FIRMS is the acronym for it. Please don't ask me what they all stand for. Aaron knows what it is. But it is one of several tools that we look at and use to see where fires are progressing, because once they get so big, it is very hard to see around them. So it is a tool that we use to help us understand where the fire is growing and how it's expanding beyond where we can see it. And this combined with actual flights around the fire and helicopters and that, we determined that the fire had reached our trigger points, like she said. And we asked several of our staff, as well as many others in the community, to move south to Pink Mountain as well. So can you flip to the next slide, please? So at the same time, these are many of the other fires that were ongoing around us. So you can see the Patry Lake fire just to the north of Fort Nelson. That fire made somewhere between a 20 to 30 kilometer run in about a 12-hour period. And the same winds, luckily, did not affect the Parker Lake fire. Otherwise, you can see the growth that had occurred on many of the fires in this area on May 13th. And for some reason, Mother Nature has its whims. We were fortunate enough not to receive the same winds on the Parker Lake fire. And, you know, combined with fire suppression efforts, because we had a lot of heavy equipment, crews and helicopters working the Parker Lake fire to try suppress the fire and to prevent it from coming into town. And so that's what that slide shows, is what was occurring around us and why we make sometimes the decisions we do isn't just based on what we see right in front of us. It's also based on what's occurring across the landscape. So it's sometimes a really big picture. Yeah. There you go. I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Mark. So May 13th to 16th. So in that week following, at the beginning of the week, we were really focused on continuing the critical community functions, such as maintaining our water supply, specifically in rural water west. Many people might be aware, but we had a water operator who stayed in the community. He actually slept at the water plant to ensure that that water supply was maintained. We also focused on community security, completing damage assessments, communications, supporting the ESS providers, our great host communities, and reestablishing those critical NRM business functions. In the latter half, we, in addition to all that incident response and support, we began planning the return to the community. So we held meetings with BC Wildfire and EMCR to determine what was required, what did we need to do, and what were those milestones that we had to achieve in order to get everyone back home. In addition to never having evacuated a community, we'd never brought a community home. So the items that we really needed to address were critical infrastructure. So that included things like water, sewer, telecommunications, power, and natural gas. We needed to have the removal of that structural protection equipment that was out on people's homes. We needed to ensure that critical services were resumed. So that included things such as healthcare, emergency services, food, fuel. We also needed to have conducted risk assessments on the wildfire impacts. So danger trees, open pits, damaged properties. There was a number of those types of impacts. Moving on to the following few days. Our EOC moved back. We learned from our first time. So the first time we moved all at once. The next time we're like, no, we're not doing that again. So we staged ourselves. We sent an advance team back, waited until they established the EOC, and then a team followed them. So we transitioned back to Fort Nelson from over May 18th and 19th from Pink Mountain. And you can see a picture of our EOC there. We were in an oil and gas camp in about a 12-foot wide trailer. As the fire activity lessened, the community risk shifted from imminent risk from wildfire to that lack of core community services and facilities, which are required to facilitate community repatriation. So on May 22nd, we announced that we were working towards that community repatriation. As key milestones were reached towards that reentry, our EOC continued to focus on reentry and recovery, including arranging transportation. So for everybody that we helped get out of community, we now had to help bring back. We had resident and business supports. We had questions from businesses in town about their business continuity insurance, about different things. We needed to start focusing on community resiliency. So you experienced that when you returned to the community, and the Red Cross was here and we had our Community Resiliency Center open. We knew we were going to need to focus on solid waste disposal. We knew we had power loss for an extended period of time, and we needed to focus on getting the business of the municipality back up and running as soon as possible. And that is my last slide, and I'm going to turn it over to the mayor.
Thanks for that, Aaron. I'd like to ask Heather McRae to come up. Heather, as I said, she works for Emergency Management Climate Readiness, so she'll talk to the EMCR roles and as well as the ESS support communities.
So the province, so like Rob's Mayor, okay, Rob said, my role is regional manager with Emergency Management Climate Readiness. It's Heather McRae. For this activation, I actually got to return to community to help out. I did live in Fort Nelson for several years back in the early 2000s. So got to return back, and I actually worked with the Emergency Operations Center in Pink Mountain for several days, along with my coworker that also came up and shifted off with me as well, Janelle. So we were here with the EOC helping support along the way. So emergency management and climate readiness's role is generally to support emergency operations centers during an emergency event. So some of those supports include reimbursement of some of the costs. This was your emergency, but it's not your community's fault in any way. So a lot of that support and financial support comes through the province to help support that emergency. The intent is not to, we can't have a community go bankrupt because of an event that happened to them. So that support comes from the provincial level as well for eligible items that are spent on the emergency. We also support for some of the emergency support services program. We support that through the actual host communities. So the host communities are responsible for the actions that happen, but we support that emergency support program at the provincial level through policy. And then some of the other things that we offer as well is recovery supports. So for kind of short, medium, and long-term recovery. So in some events, of course, there is critical infrastructure loss and things like that require long-term recovery as well. And outside of an emergency event, we're also working with Aaron and the community quite a bit on emergency planning. So talked lots just before this event actually about the emergency plan and the types of people that were critical to the community and who would stay at different points. So we do that as well for planning, and we also offer training for emergency operations centers throughout the years. So we've been in contact with the community for many, many years working on this program. Okay. And I just want to recognize some of the communities that were acting as host communities. So these communities do this through a volunteer program. A lot of the folks that you guys met down in the communities were volunteers. They were supported by the host community staff that are responsible for being host communities. It's an offer, it's a service that they offer. So when their neighbors go out, it's a service that they offer. So a big thanks to these communities that offered that service. Aside from that, there was also 6 other communities in the background that were doing remote mutual aid. So there was communities down in the Lower Mainland and the Okanagan and all of those places that were also doing that as well. So our job is to, in emergency support services, is specifically a needs-based assessment. So that's why you guys had to go to a reception center and actually talk to somebody. So this program is set up to cover people's basic needs during an emergency. And in most cases, that's shelter and food. That's the 2 primary items that are available through ESS. There is some secondary items as well, like transportation. And in this case, because of the extensive distance that you had to evacuate, so there was fuel costs and things like that considered as well. So that's why you have those interviews with the people at the reception centers to figure out what the needs are for your situation, your family, and what you are actually doing at that time. So it's supposed to be There's supposed to be additional things added as well. And these are the secondary items such as mental health. So we had disaster psychosocial with us as well at the reception centers. There is some pet care, and there was some offered for pet rooms and a few things like that for at the camp lodging facility. There was a pet shelter set up as well. And secondary supports can also include things like health services and things like that as well. So there is some pieces that you do for delivery and registration for this. So evacuees can use what we did here. And this is the first year that these local communities have been on the ERA system. It's called I never know the acronyms either. So it's the digital tool that we use to register folks for emergency support services. This is the first year that they've operated this system in the North region and not been on paper. So it was a huge boon to be able to easily and quickly renew folks for their services. If there was no changes to your services, it was very quick to renew and copy your previous services. This is the first year they've done that, and Chetwynd wasn't quite on that service yet, so that you will see some inequalities in the service just because Chetwynd was still on the hand paper written system. But the registration tool, anybody that did go is now registered for hopefully not future events. And so if that system holds that information and you're able to keep your information and update that on a daily basis so that you can be ready to evacuate again in another time. Next slide. So like I mentioned, this is a needs-based system. So it is standardized throughout the province. So the services and values associated to the ESS program are standardized throughout the province. This goes through, Treasury Board at the provincial level, and these rates are set through that system. So even though amounts may have varied for different people in different same size families, because it is based on the needs that you express during that interview with your ESS volunteer. So the rates that you see there include groceries and/or restaurant meals and accommodations, and some incidentals or clothing if necessary. So those are kind of the secondary items that folks, if you had time to evacuate and you're able to pack, but some people were tactically evacuated, as we mentioned, and would have received possible clothing because they couldn't have packed before they left. And other people weren't able to return home before they had to actually leave they were out at work or something of that sort and weren't able to return home. So you will have seen differences in values throughout the system. Okay. Okay, I think that's it for me.
Thank you. So Lisa, our Director of Planning, will speak to the step phase program that we enacted when it came to recovering and trying to get everybody back into the community in a timely way.
Thank you, Mayor Fraser. Firstly, welcome home, and thank you for taking the time to come out tonight. It's a relief to see a lot of familiar faces sitting out there. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lisa Thompson, and I'm the Director of Regional Development and Planning with Northern Rockies Regional Municipality. In addition to my normal position during the evacuation, I acted at times as the section planning chief for the EOC. So as such, I had the privilege of working with many of you sitting out here tonight, planning for different events and things that we needed to undertake. The one piece I'm going to touch on tonight is actually around the planning for community reentry that had to be undertaken prior to May 27th. So specifically, what I'm going to be talking about is the approach that we took to phase people back into our community, including service providers, business owners, and residents. And again, prior to that evacuation order being lifted on May 27th. So the overarching goal is that residents are welcomed home to a community that is safe and has essential services in place to meet residents' needs. So I'm going to ask you to think about that while I go through these few slides, that was our overarching goal, was to make sure that you had a community that was safe to come home to. So a phased approach to public reentry was utilized following guidelines that were provided through the province and through emergency management professionals. The priorities for reentry, as Aaron touched on previously, were essentially 4 phases. So our first phase was essential services. Phase 2 was critical businesses and services. Phase 3 was life support businesses and services. And then phase 4 was when we actually opened up to the entire community. For phase 1, those are our essential services. So it was important to make sure that our first responders, including RCMP, Fire Rescue, BC Wildfire Service, Emergency Operations Center staff, airport operations, and water utility operators were able to come into the community to make sure that those services were in place. As the mayor mentioned earlier, some of our families, friends, neighbors incurred losses during the evacuation. So it was important that during phase 1, we also made space for those people to return to the community if they wished to, so that they had an opportunity to see their properties before the rest of the community returned. So that occurred in phase 1 as well. So during phase 1, there were also some critical actions that needed to be completed prior to the general entry of the community, and Aaron touched on those as well. So things like removing structural protection units from buildings, securing some of those properties that have been damaged by wildfire, and then the closure of some hazardous areas such as the Parker Lake recreation site. So those things needed to occur to make sure that it was safe for people to return. Once we were assured that we had what we needed or who we needed in the community for phase 1, we moved to phase 2, which is the critical businesses and services. So these were like the BC Hydro crews, the Fortis BC, Northwest Tel, ambulance, pharmacies, gas stations, grocery stores, the medical clinic, the Fort Nelson General Hospital, of course, and the landfill and disposal services. So those services are essential to make sure that you have the services that are needed for your day-to-day lives. So during this phase 2, we also started to focus on, like it was mentioned earlier, getting those residents back into the community that had left by bus or that required assistance getting back home. For phase 3, these are the life support businesses. So once we had invited back those other services, we started looking at life support businesses and services such as School District 81 and the senior staff from the school district. Things like the post office and insurance agencies, seniors care, veterinary services, Service BC, Canadian Rangers, and there's a list up there. This is at the time too, and we also started to ask restaurants in particular of their needs around coming back into the community to deal with things like spoiled food and things like that before the rest of the general population had returned. The one thing I'm going to point out is this all happened. These phases happened within a very short period. So we're talking about a 4 to 5 day period. And as many of you are aware, we did have an access permit process that was required. So people actually had to apply to come back into the community. And that was the same for everybody, including us as EOC. We had to fill out those access permit applications. So anyone essentially wishing to enter the community had to fill out one of those access permits. We did receive in a 1 week period, I would say, we received over 1,400 applications. And that was pretty much a full-time job for 2 or 3 staff who tirelessly reviewed those applications to ensure that the people who needed to be back in the community could actually come in. So during that 1 week, we issued approximately 974 access permits. So there were actually 974 approved, let's say, individuals or permits for people to come back into the community based on those priorities. So in phase 4, which was May 27th at 8:00 a.m., the evacuation order was rescinded. And that's when, of course, retail businesses, service-based businesses such as hotels, motels, and the general community, as well as the remainder of the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality staff, were able to come back into the community. So I'd just like to finish off by saying that at the beginning of the presentation, I asked you to please keep in mind the primary goal, which was our goal was to make sure that residents are welcomed home to a community that is safe and has essential services in place to meet residents' needs. So I hope the information that I've provided and the demonstration of those priorities, help underscore how we achieve that goal. And once again, thank you for your time.
I guess it's up to me to sort of wrap up the presentation portion of tonight before we get into the question and answers. I just wanted to say that there was an awful lot going on before this had happened, and as Heather had said, she's been working with Erin and her staff for a couple of years, particularly last year when we had such an extensive wildfire season. And Erin had planned a series of meetings, actually, I think, to discuss what our evacuation plan would look like, because we were planning on having a tabletop exercise on June the 4th. That didn't have to happen. I think the school district was really the only group that she got to in early May before we had the announcement on May the 10th that we had to move. But this is just the first of many meetings I think that we need to have in our community to talk mainly tonight about the evacuation and the services that you received in the host communities and then the return back. We will be doing after action review with all of the agencies that were involved, with our EOC and our staff, to really sit down and talk about some of the things we learned tonight, some of the things that we had learned ourselves throughout the 17 days that we were working with all of them. We'll be conducting an internal EOC debrief, so where we'll actually sit with our own staff and review the incident, review all the information post-incident, so that we can modify the plans that we have in place to make them better. Of course, we'll work with the nation, their EOC and their council, to make sure that anything that we do together will strengthen all of our plans together. This is speaking more to the resiliency plan, the community resiliency plan. So we did have in the budget this year that we will be hiring a fire smart person to help us pull all of that together. We will be striking up a community wildfire resiliency committee, which will look at the entire resiliency plan, look at try to take advantage, I guess, of some of the work that's been done during this fire to protect the community, and see if we can leverage off that moving forward. So that committee will be doing an awful lot of work. They'll be working together with the community forest. If there are areas that we feel as a community need to be rehabilitated or sanitized or thinned or whatever we end up deciding to do, that we'll need to lobby the province to try to pull those parts of the Crown land maybe into our community forest. So there's lots of things that we need to talk about and do as we move forward. So those are all plans as we take this forward. So I think that's everything on the slide I needed to talk about. Yeah. Okay. Question time. We have some questions. I think some have been coming in. First question is actually directed to the municipality, but and actually there might be the RCMP and potentially maybe somebody from the wildfire service might be able to talk to the days when the RCMP left the community. So the question is, why were the RCMP sent out of town for 2 days during the evacuation? Who's responsible for protecting homes and property from theft during this time? So I don't know if Sergeant Moffat, are you
Rob,
on? Can you
can you-
answer that question? Go ahead.
Yeah, Rob, it's Brian here. So our members on the ground made every conceivable effort to ensure the public safety of all the residents prior to the evacuation order. Once the evacuation order was issued. It was my decision as the district officer for the members and their families to leave the community. I at no time was going to risk their health, safety, and well-being by having them remain in community. We were out of the community for approximately less than 36 hours. There was some incidents of theft, mischief within the community that we have investigated. So ultimately, the decision rested with myself as a district officer, all to ensure the safety of my membership was first and foremost. And as soon as we could get back in that community, which we did, we were there. We maintained patrols on the highway to ensure a presence while out of the community. But ultimately, the decision rested with myself.
Yeah, so working with our fire behavior specialists, our weather forecasters, and along with a bunch of all the agencies that were here, including the EOC, James at the fire department, we together established where we established 2 safe zones that we felt that if we had to shelter in place, if the fire was to come into Fort Nelson, where those would be, the safest zones that we felt that wouldn't be impacted if the fire were to make that big run that was predicted. But we also had to take into account that if certain people didn't have to be in town, that they should leave. And we at BC Wildfire, we evacuated over half of our staff to Pink Mountain. There was just a core group of folks here. We moved all of our air resources down to Pink Mountain. And when speaking with the RCMP, the fire departments, we gave them our best judgment on what may occur with the fire at the time and left it up to them to determine what was in the best, safest actions that they could take for their members. And that is, we go back to that visual that Aaron showed, and it's our responsibility as incident commanders and as leaders for our organizations to look after the safety of our responders first and foremost, because nothing's more valuable than the people that are here to protect all of us. So that's how that got made. And those trigger points were established and they were met, and we made the call to have people leave.
Thank you. So they made a plan and they followed that plan, and we knew what it was in advance. It wasn't like this is something that was put into place. If the fire got to the river, if it got to the bridge, if it got across the pipeline, if it was spotting across the river towards Gasoline Alley, that was the trigger, and that happened. And so they executed the plan the way they had put it into place, and so it was unfortunate because it does put the community at some risk with respect to that. But as Aaron put up there, the protection of the first responders is the number one priority in that process. So the next, and there are some learnings. We'll continue to work with the RCMP in the after action review to see if there's anything that could have been done differently. Communication. This question is for Aaron. Why was there no information being relayed to the public through the local radio station during and after the evacuation? And yeah, I guess that's well, actually the answer is written here for me. So Ken J confirmed on the earlier one I had, it wasn't written there for me. So thank you for putting it down there. So Ken J confirmed that he continued to do daily news broadcasts and welcome calls directly if anybody has any questions. So that's our local radio broadcaster. So you can, if you didn't hear the news, he was doing the news. So they checked out. Tree management and power lines. So this is actually a question for BC Hydro. Will BC Hydro take care of the trees near power lines and public lands to prevent future fires, especially near the old Alaska Highway? Council had a discussion about this on Monday night. Our strategy is still in camera, but we need to ensure that we get a report with respect to the causation of the fire before we start throwing around any accusations. But we will work with with BC Hydro, particularly as we're in an area that's, that's in a drought. We've had several closures, several shutdowns of, of the hydro, due to those types of causes. So we'll put together a brief and we'll meet with BC Hydro and we'll see what we can do to get them into a position where they can at least give us a plan with respect to what they're going to do on their right of ways. Senior Society. So this, Aaron, I think this is for you, and it's specific around the Senior Society bus being used in the community evacuations, or should they focus solely on their residents? And is the town responsible for handicap accessible hotels at the ESS host communities? And is there an evacuation template that organizations can use to prepare themselves?
Is it on now?
I can hear, yeah,
Oh,
speak
okay.
close. Yeah.
The Senior Society bus is a resource that we acknowledge would belong to Northern Health at the start, to help evacuate any of those individuals, vulnerable persons requiring that accessible transportation, particularly to get them to either the woodlands or other muster points within the community. And as an EOC, we would be the last user of the seniors bus. So we would allow that bus to be utilized through Northern Health for any of the Better at Home or any of those other individuals that are doing their care at home. The second question was?
Can the town provide information on handicapped accessible hotels in the ESS host communities?
I cannot provide any information on accessible hotels in the host communities, other than I know when the registration happens, unfortunately, there was a long lineup. There was a very long queue. And if somebody needed an accessible accommodation, those accessible accommodations, I would hope, would be held by hotels for individuals who needed them. So they may have been given away prior to some individuals receiving them. But I am also now just today been made aware of there is a very large change being made to the emergency support system within the province of British Columbia that will help address individuals receiving the type of accommodation and the location of the accommodation that they need for themselves. So the province has completely revamped the ESS system, and that just came out about an hour before this meeting. So we will be communicating those changes to the ESS system, and that will help those who need or have a need for a particular type of accommodation, such as accessible pet care, or another specialties, just like a non-general room. And the third question?
The third question, is there an evacuation plan template that organizations can take and use?
There would be like an evacuation template that they could utilize for the evacuation of like a business. It would be part of their fire safety plan that could be developed in cooperation with the fire department. In terms of an evacuation template for themselves, if they were a say like a multi-unit residential dwelling, we can definitely work with them to design again a plan that would develop muster points, and it would develop communication strategies for the residents in like a multi-unit facility. Yes, we can definitely help with that.
So I think the seniors groups in the community were on your list of groups to speak with. And a lot of these questions probably could have been answered if we'd had an opportunity.
Yes.
Right? How do we use your bus? Let's talk about using your bus. Let's talk about, what's the best way to evacuate? What are we depending on you for or not? So I think it's fair to say we still plan on doing that.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
working with all the groups in the community to really help people understand their role in an evacuation.
And just for some general note, if there's anybody here who lives in sort of like a facility like Grace Manor is just a multi-unit housing facility. So we would be communicating with individuals who live in especially units that we feel might contain vulnerable persons. So we would be communicating with them Most of them would require assistance getting to a place like the Woodlands for transportation. And though that would be the assistance that would be provided so they could muster within their building. And then we would help transport them to a muster station like we use the Woodlands in this instance, where they would then get on other buses and be transferred to places like Fort St. John.
Okay, thank you. I did speak to Minister Ma today, who's the Minister of Emergency Management at 4 o'clock. She called me to talk a little bit about what this meeting was about and that she was interested in hearing back from us. She also informed me about the new resources, I guess. It's $200 for any family that needs assistance in accommodation. It can be used in any community to try to help relieve some of the communities. So for those who ended up going north, that would have been available to them if it ever has to happen again. And the second part of that she told me was that in some evacuations where there are thousands of people potentially having to stand in line, that there may be a self-registration process that you'll be able to use in the future so that people don't have to stand in line. Those who need assistance might still have to stand in line, but anybody else might be able to use that. It won't be used for small evacuations, but it'll be used for larger evacuations where there might be thousands of people standing in line. So those were announced today. Okay, next question I have here will be for Heather. Where did I go? Yeah. Why was it not communicated that ESS financial assistance would need to be repaid? Yeah. How will future evacuations be managed to avoid financial confusion? And what actions will be taken against those who may have exploited the ESS system?
So ESS financial, if you received direct financial supports and not just restaurant referrals and things like that, that will not have to be paid back. 100% not.
There's no tax implication?
Nope, there is not. You will not be required to claim that on your taxes in any way or anything. It's a needs-based opportunity to receive that money to use as you need for your family and for your basic needs. So no, there will be no payback, even if you didn't use all of the services. So you were paid till 10 days out or 7 days out, and maybe you came back after 5. None of that extra amount needs to be paid back.
So with respect to why it wasn't communicated that way, it's because that doesn't have to happen. So they didn't tell anybody because it's not a requirement to have to pay it back, or is it clawed back on your taxes?
Yeah, not at all.
So that answers the second question. And, is there anything in place that takes care of anybody who may have exploited the system?
So there is an opportunity to look through the system because it is digital, and compare those paper versions as well for individuals. So that can be seen, but we haven't honestly done any of that analysis at this point. And we generally do not do that. We just come up with opportunities to eliminate that type of fraud in the future. So the system is digital. It's being, as I said, it was first used in this situation in the north up here. So it's all being assessed each time to be able to eliminate those types of things.
Okay, Aaron, the next series of questions are for you. And I think you talked about it and I think mainly it's around the Voyant system and why some people never got a notification on the Voyant system. And I know there's a couple of glitches with that I think you might want to talk about. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that one. The next one has to do about informing homeowners of their loss.
I can speak to the Voyant system. So the Voyant system that we adopted a number of years ago has, I think it has 4 or 5 options that you can elect to receive notifications. So the first one is SMS. So we had an individual put in a question saying that they did not receive that first Voyant alert that went out to the west of the community. So we looked into the system We found that they had registered in the system with SMS, which is text message. And text message cannot be geo-referenced. So with the Voyant system, when we send out an alert, we draw a polygon or a box or a triangle on a map, and that alert goes to individuals who have pinned themselves, either their home or their work or a place that they care about within that area. It will send notices to people who have pinned themselves in that area. It will also send notices to people who have installed the app and have allowed the app to track them. So that's where that geofence comes in. So if you are within that area and you have installed the app and you have set your notifications or your permissions to allow the app to track you, it will also notify you. We'll also dial a phone number. So it will dial any phone number that you put into the system. We had somebody write in with a concern that they did not receive the alert. When we looked, they had signed up by SMS and they had pinned themselves in town, not where their home was, which was out west. So for that first alert, it was a pretty tight area. As Chief mentioned, it was from mile 301 to mile 2, the old Formula Powell set of buildings. So that was that first alert. So that was a very, very small area. So we actually, the system sent out 120 notifications. There were 5 mobile notifications. That was those roaming people who had allowed the app to track them. The rest were people who had pinned their location as either their home or work or another location. So we are working on communicating with setting out some communications with Voyant to get people to update their app on a regular basis. Because what also happens is Apple and Google, if you do not use an app within 3 months, they deprioritize that app on your phone. They actually upload it to the cloud. You have to reinstall that app in order for it to be to send you notifications again. Voyant is lobbying both Google Play and Apple to get that to stop because they feel that they are an emergency communication system and they shouldn't have to do that. So as part of our after action report, we are going to send out regular test alerts to keep that app active on our residents' phones. We're also going to be conducting through some test alerts. If you don't receive an alert, Voyant has offered to support us and help troubleshoot why an individual resident didn't receive alert. And they're going to sort of walk them through that, make sure that their settings are correct, and we can go through that process. And that is one of the reasons why in the broad evacuation, we also issued that provincial broadcast intrusive alert, because there is no opting out of that one. That one doesn't miss anybody who is listening to a local radio, local television, or an LTE equipped cell phone.
Okay.
Cell phone or anything of that. So I'm curious to see how that works and what the possibilities of that happening are.
So we'll note that. Okay,
It seems like a pretty simple solution. to
Yeah,
people
we
who don't
can
have
note that.
cell
That's the
phones.
way it used to be in the old days.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fire hall had a bell on the top. We went away from that. I can't remember exactly why. Probably because everybody figured electronic was better. But we can take that and we can discuss that process. The next question is, why did it take so long to officially inform homeowners of their loss? And this one's near and dear to me because I was chomping at the bit. But there are some reasons with respect. And the second part, which is really part of that same, was why were officials unable to assess damage in a timely manner while others were able to take photos and videos? Aaron?
I can start that one off. So at the time we were looking to do the damage assessments, the EOC was outside of the community. Those damage assessments needed to be conducted by the fire department on the ground. So Chief Childs needed to visit all of those sites. When I asked to see if we could visit those sites as an EOC personnel, and I greatly respected his decision, he told me that that was not possible. Those sites were too dangerous. They had to conduct danger tree assessments on every single one of those properties before personnel entered. Again, we're going to go back to those response goals. The danger trees that were out there, James was describing to me the situation. It absolutely was not safe to enter those properties. When you do a property damage assessment, particularly somebody who has lost a home, you want to make sure that you have it right. So we needed to know exactly what property, be able to look at the roll number, look up the property owner, and find all of that information, including document all of the property losses on that particular property. And I'll let the mayor answer the next one.
Yeah, with respect to people driving around and taking pictures, very difficult to stop that. You know, whether, you know, because there weren't roadblocks in the community. While the RCMP were here, they were doing patrols. But if somebody decided they wanted to get on their motorcycle or get on their quad or get in their car and just ignore all of the stop signs and whoa, don't goes, and just went out there and took pictures and then posted them on Facebook, extremely difficult for us to stop that. And yeah, I said my piece, and I said my piece with respect to that, and the behavior continued. But I certainly wouldn't want, you know, my property to be shown to me on Facebook or something like that. So it really is unconscionable as far as I was concerned. But in today's age of social media and immediate gratification, it was a difficult one to try to deal with. I mean, we could get tougher. We could ask the RCMP to get tougher, but there's a fine line between stepping on people's rights and making sure that their safety is looked after. It's a very fine line there.
It sounds like you can hold it, go ahead. It sounds like the ESS is doing a fabulous job of looking at the things that need to be fixed and looked at, and all of the mistakes that were made and the things that need to be fixed or whatever. But let's go back to the first question that we talked about, the first question that came in about the RCMP being in town or not being in town in the 36 hours, the 48 hours that they weren't here, or however that works. I think that's something that we really need to look into because of the people that were left in town. Not them specifically, but the amount of people that were left in town. It seems to me that then if this was to happen again and some of us choose to stay, it might become its own rodeo when people policing what's going on in town and protecting their homes. So what is the plan to have the RCMP stay to some degree? We can't abandon the town altogether. That's just asking for a rodeo, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. You know, the RCMP have said their piece on it so far. They'll definitely be involved in the after action review that we'll do, because there's some very specific things that we'll want to talk to them about that they may not want to be public.
Absolutely.
Right. So we'll have those discussions, and, you know, your concerns are our concerns. I mean, we don't want to see people's houses being broken into. You know, we don't want to see people roaming around the community when they shouldn't be roaming around the community. We've learned that there are, for some people who stayed and did some voluntary work that wasn't identified in our plan, that's some stuff that we can put in our plan. You know, looking after pets and stuff, that those folks ended up staying in town and took on that voluntary role. That wasn't in our plan, you know, and a tactical evacuation of the whole community, but they did a good job. And so those are the types of things we're looking for as we move forward to modify our plan. The act is pretty clear. If there's an evacuation order, you are to move out of the community or you stay on your own property.
So the people that were
So-
in town roaming
so-
around, did anybody get arrested?
So no, the enforcement of that are, you know, it's a fine line between the rights of people and the safety of people and the safety of the community. Those are discussions that we're not the first ones who have ever been in this situation. So I'm sure there are others that we can turn to find out, you know, just how strict do you need to get?
So is the answer being that anytime this if this was to happen again, that is definitely protocol that all our CMP leave town?
No. And I think we explained why the RCMP left town with
Yeah.
respect to the safety of first responders in the community, and the trigger point that was determined and met. Determining what the retreat's not the right word. Determining what the service is after that, a situation like that, where they actually have to go out of the community. Like, what does that look like? What does that, for us, it might be different than what it looks like in West Kelowna. I mean, we got one road in, one road out. Maybe, going as far as Prophet River and trying to deal with that there. I mean, those are all things we need to talk about with the RCMP in the after action review. Okay. Yeah.
Coordinator never really got planned. So we talk lots of meetings and lots of planning things and lots of meetings about things, but it seems like we didn't really have a real good action plan in, like you just suggested, Mayor Rob Fraser, in the idea of having some grassroots organization and more coming together as a community to help the people that did a fabulous job in saving our community.
So. Yeah, I'm not even gonna respond to that. There is I think one of the RCMP are online and would like to answer this question.
Yeah, Rob, it's Brian Edmonds here. If I heard the comment correctly, there was a thought that we could arrest individuals that chose not to evacuate once the order was issued. That is not our position. If a person in the community is an adult, they have made the conscious, informed decision that they are going to stay in the community. We are not going to arrest them. The only time we will engage at a higher level is if there's young persons in a household. We will work with MCFD and enforce the fact that those children need to be removed and placed in a safe area or community outside of the evacuation order. So we will not go around arresting individuals who choose voluntarily to remain in community after being well informed of the risk that they take on should they decide to stay.
You need to be, with the folks that are supposed to be staying on their own property. And that's a discussion for us to have with the RCMP and the province, if that's the case. If the legislation is unenforceable, then we need to look at it. Okay.
Mayor, I've got a couple on the floor.
Okay.
Hi, my first question, I guess it's for Heather. As far as ESS supports and stuff, my husband and myself were actually north when all of this took place. I registered on the app and kept getting notifications I had to report in person. Well, we were at the Liard Hot Springs Lodge. There is no ESS. And then by time, thanks to Krista, we did finally get a phone call, but it took just about a week. And I'm not looking for financial support, but there was a lot of people up there that got stuck north. What's the protocol on something like that?
So that is something that exactly is being fixed by the new program that is being offered and announced today. So we realize that is a gap, and we've been realizing this through multiple different situations over the last little while. And there's something being called a shelter allowance coming out now. So anybody that has a profile in the registration system can able to access a shelter allowance from anywhere in the province, so that you can shelter as you need as a family in the location that you need as a family as well. So that shelter allowance will now cover those costs for that type of thing. So it is, as of today, and I know it was not ideal for this situation, but that situation was recognized and the fix has been offered today. So it's up to 200, like the exact numbers I have here, actually, it's $200 a night for shelter purposes, up to $200 a night for shelter purposes, and $400 per night for a family of 6 or more people. So hopefully that'll alleviate it. And again, we'll do that evaluation after subsequent seasons to figure out how that's been working.
Okay, and that was actually the next question. How will the NRM and ESS ensure better support for people stranded north? So that was timely. Another question off the floor?
The looters that are getting let go every time we catch them. I was on that 12-hour shift from 7 to 7 at night. We would help apprehend these guys riding their bikes, saying their quads, saying that they're watering dogs at 3 o'clock in the morning. Who does that? And then the RCMP come, but they never pound the bikes that don't have licenses on them. And why would we keep letting these guys go free?
Now, those are questions for the RCMP, and
Well,
they're here. They're just not in the room. So, Chief Superintendent, can you answer that question? So the question essentially is, you know, why aren't these people that are looting and being caught arrested and
At least
jailed, or
Well-
at least?
To speak from a fact-based position, a number of individuals, local individuals who were committing various property-related, mischief-related crimes were arrested and in a very timely manner escorted out of the community to places like Fort St. John. So there was a number of individuals that we did arrest for various criminal offenses, and they were subsequently removed from the community.
Those are with respect to the security of the community at the after action review. I just can't, you know, stress enough that these questions will be posed and we'll work with the RCMP to see what we might be able to do.
Well, just
the next
at
time.
least impound the bikes when they're caught at night, because
Yeah.
that saves us from driving around till
And that-
for
that's
12
not,
hours.
that's just not a problem during
Yeah.
evacuations. That's a problem all the time.
Well, it gets more
Okay.
issued during non-evacuation than it does during an evacuation, it seems like.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Okay.
On to the next question, please.
Thank you. First, I want to just express my boundless gratitude and appreciation to all of you. Thank you, heartfelt. I want to thank Erin in particular. We had a meeting scheduled for seniors for Wednesday, the 15th at Lamplighters to go over emergency planning. Nobody, of course, could have foreseen what the wind did on the 10th. I think that one of the questions that's come up, it came up at the community roundtable meeting of nonprofits, the first Wednesday of June, is the role that the frontline workers in the nonprofit sector can play in future emergency planning. I don't expect that you necessarily have an answer to that right this minute, but something to bear in mind that we have already engaged in sharing resources such as the template for business continuity planning and some other emergency planning stuff. And we will continue to follow up as the EDs of various nonprofit organizations. And finally, I want to comment that just like rape is due to rapists, theft is not due to the RCMP, theft is due to thieves. And so, yes, of course, I completely respect that the RCMP are human beings with families. They needed to evacuate and have that as their top priority during that short and intense time period. I appreciate their quickness in getting back into the community. It is a problem. Absolutely, looting is a problem. But it's the looters who are the problem. It's not the police who are the problem. I do seriously believe they're doing their best, just as all of you did with the help of Mother Nature, a tremendously fortunate outcome for all of us. So again, thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, I'm out of pre-submitted questions. I do have a couple that have been sent in. I think this question's been answered, but I think the person probably wants it to be read, so I'll read it. It is my understanding that many meetings and hours have been spent on crisis management, so I'm confused about the lack of communication on the council level. I heard about the evacuation at the local grocery store from a councillor as he asked from a half aisle away. When he asked if I was ready to go with my to-go bag, I let him know I was informed by another councillor in the parking lot as we looked at smoke cloud that no, we were not being evacuated. I was unable to find any information on us being evacuated except the councillor's Facebook page. I do not believe Facebook is an effective method to inform people in a professional way. Is the council working together? And I say clearly that I think Erin explained that well, that there were multiple ways that this was communicated to the public. Facebook just happened to be the fastest because it does respond almost immediately to the poster. So there were, yes, the council was aware and were doing notifications with people while they themselves were preparing themselves to to move out of the community. I mean, it was all hands on deck to try to get as much information out in this tactical evacuation for the entire community. It's not like we had any time. The notice was extremely small. So have we learned? Yeah, we've learned some things about Voyant. We've learned some things about the way we might be able to go door to door to enhance that, and those will be brought into, you know, the review as we look at the plan moving forward. It's my understanding that when a looter was arrested by the RCMP, they were let go the next day to reoffend. Is this correct? If it is correct, is it the protocol that we will follow in other evacuations? I think that the superintendent answered that the best way that he could. And then we already had it and I think we've probably agreed to disagree, except to talk about this moving forward. When people choose to stay in the community, they need to stay on their own property. How is this enforced? And I guess that's what we'll have to determine with respect to, you know, how strict we need to have this enforced, and what authority we or the RCMP have. We certainly don't have the authority. So we've got to work with the RCMP to see what authority they have. And if we don't like that answer, I guess we take it up the ladder. But that's what we do as influencers. We're not, as a council and as a staff of this community, we're not very often the decision makers in these, but we are influencers, and we'll do what we can to try to influence the policies of other agencies, because there are learnings, and you know, anybody who loses a piece of property through fire or through theft is going to be angry. But generally, this was a pretty positive and pretty successful event. We can learn from the little things that did go wrong. And, you know, I've heard about all these things throughout the week, that these things were happening or they were rumored to happen. And when we do the after action review with all the agencies, these are the types of things that we'll talk about. Question from the floor, please.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things here. Traffic control. When we were evacuating, I noticed, well, because I'm from Vancouver and rock concerts and all that kind of stuff have a flow, we didn't have a flow. So I think either the RCMP or a few people that I would be willing to volunteer to do traffic control, and let a couple go that are on the Alaska Highway and let a couple go that are on a side street, so that people on the side street aren't waiting and waiting and waiting. And I actually stopped and let somebody in and they didn't even know what to do. So I ended up yelling at them to tell them to go. But that could be something that could be worked on for the next time if it ever happens again. And the other question I had was the zombie fires for historically have been put out over the winter. And I would like to know why that's not being done. And yeah, like the Patry fire and the fires on the Sierra could have been avoided big time if the smoke had been seen in the winter time, and it needs to be dug out and it needs to be put out right then, and that would alleviate a lot of what happened in this situation.
Yeah, this evacuation was particular to the Parker Lake fire. I don't know if the guys here have the ability to speak to policy around those fires. I know it's bigger than here, right? There's 87 fires around the whole province that were burning over the winter. And so it's likely a provincial discussion that needs to happen. And I'll let Mark speak to what he can. I mean, I know you're a field guy, you're not the decision maker there.
Yeah. I'm going to give you the simplest answer I can, is if you go to bcwildfire.ca and you go to, we have released the latest bulletin report on it. It will explain that in great detail about holdover fires and what our actions were over the winter and into the spring and subsequently. And yeah, that's the easiest answer I can give you. And the reason we're all here is we're working not only on the Parker Lake fire, but we're also working on many of those other fires at the same time. Yeah. And that's why there were resources extra resources already in Fort Nelson is because we had crews and an IMT and helicopters working on some of those holdover fires. They were already here.
Can you hear me in the back? Yeah, okay. So, I agree that the province needs to be looking at these because there's potential, opportunity to save, maybe millions of dollars if these fires are put out. But, go to the webpage and see what it has to say. And it's certainly a discussion, not just for us, but for many of the fire districts around the entire province. And if there was a blessing at all with that holdover fire on the Patry, is that they were here. Normally, if that Patry fire hadn't have been going, there would have been the normal zone firefighters, probably a couple of rapid attack teams and the local zone officer. They would not have had a incident command team here. They would not have had, I don't know how many helicopters, some. So that when our chief called them and asked for some assist, they were there in half an hour. You heard the chief said that. It probably would have been a day or more that we would have been on our own without that air support, without the support of the BC Wildfire Service to help direct and give some recommendations. We've got some fantastic local contractors who I'm sure would have taken direction from our chief and did some things. But I think it was a combination of our contractors, our firefighter, the wildfire service, and the wind and the weather that kept us out of this community. So, if there's any sort of if you can give them any credit at all over the fact that the Patry fire was burning, is the fact that they were here and we're in a position to be able to help us, because nobody knew this one was going to start. Okay, I think we must be getting close. Question on the floor? Go ahead.
Hi there. I'm Tammy McPherson. I've been a longtime resident in Fort Nelson. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I was actually in the same meeting that Tanis Mold was in January when we discussed with the town the impending drought season, and we needed an evacuation plan and that it would be forthcoming. To my knowledge, that evacuation plan was not shared en masse to the residents of Fort Nelson. I think that's a fail. And moving forward, seeing as we do not have a newspaper here anymore, I would suggest that if you're going to make an evacuation plan that you want to share with us, that you can print it off and maybe put it in everybody's post office box. So at least some people can post it on their fridge or share it around, instead of using social media, which many people don't have, to get your word and your message out. Secondly, with the given forecast for the fire growth for Parker Lake, ripping through Fort Nelson and all this and that, I'm wondering if Wildfire Services can let us know why the air tanker support was pulled back to Pink Mountain.
So, I'm just looking for a little clarification on what day are you speaking of with the air tankers?
When the RCMP bugged out and when the Forest Fire Services went to Pink Mountain, someone had said here that the air support was also pulled back to Pink Mountain.
Yeah, so
I'm wondering why?
Yeah, I can answer that. So that wasn't air tankers, so the fixed wing airplanes, that was the helicopters. What we did is we moved them down to, there's an airstrip at Pink Mountain. And our concern was that if the fire came into Fort Nelson and impacted the airport, it would also impact our ability to fly aircraft in heavy smoke. They can't do that. They don't have the ability to do that. So we strategically moved them to an area that we knew we could get back to the fire in clean air. So that's why we moved them, so that we could utilize them if the fire came into town. So they weren't gone for good. They were just moved to a different location so we could use them the most effective manner and not be stranded here in town.
Scott, would you like to speak to the meeting in January?
Yeah, I can speak to it. So Scott Barry, CAO. Yeah, I was at that meeting. I know there was a lot of discussions that day, and specific to the evac plan, we were in the process of, I mean, for those that attended or watched the meeting, Aaron actually did a phenomenal presentation of the evacuation plan and process at one of the council meetings prior to this event. We good point, I think, on the discussion or comment around how to get it out there in different mechanisms, because the evac plan is available on our sites. The other piece of the plan is how it's executed, I guess, an hour, and then Eric can speak better than I can regarding it, but at the same time, the intent is being prepared. There was been a lot of communication for those who attended the trade show. The trade show had lots of information regarding evacuation, being prepared, what to do. There was preparedness pails, for example, that were prepared and whatnot for the group. So all I can say, there's a significant amount of efforts and time put in, not just after that meeting at Little Lands, but prior to work on evacuation. And not saying it's perfect or that more couldn't be done, but I can tell you that there was a lot of work that was put towards it. And I think one of the pieces with it, to be quite honest, is our role as a municipality and EOC, quite frankly. And when we talk roles and responsibilities, is to get people out of the community safely. And lots of work in terms of after action plan reviews and debriefs that need to occur. To look at opportunities to bridge that gap and to look at opportunities to do better next time. But quite frankly, I mean, the community got out safely and without injury or any significant issues, and returned to community safely. And that I think that was a success, to be quite honest, especially with the amount of time we had to prepare with a tactical evacuation. And we'll continue working on it. That's all I can say.
Thanks, Scott. And these plans don't materialize overnight. They take time. They take resources. They take people to work alongside of this. We put in, our council put in this year a coordinator position to help with Fire Smart, to help with the coordination of the wildfire process. So we were doing things that was discussed. We started our budget meetings back in November. Yes, there was a meeting in town that Scott was invited to talk about what we were doing, and we are doing those things. I said we were going to have a tabletop, 2 to 4. Erin was already starting to talk to some of the other agencies in the community while she's doing the rest of her job. That's not the only job that she has to do. So she was doing that. Heather has said that we have been working together with emergency management to make sure our plan is good. I know last year they were talking about what we'd have to do if the highway was blocked to the south. You imagine doing an evacuation of this community to the north. That takes a tremendous amount of time to think about all the potential options and information that needs to be put together, resources that are needed to be able to do that, how you're going to support people along the way. All of those things were talked about, were discussed, and presented to us as a council. I forget which day it was, but I think it was probably 1 or 2 meetings before the evacuation. You can go online and you can see the presentation that was made to the council from staff. So it was happening, and we'll continue to do better. With respect to traffic control, that's definitely something that we can add into the we can add into the plan and look at it. My understanding, that's the first time I heard that people weren't zippering properly and were not being I guess thoughtful about other people trying to get out on the highway. That's the first I heard of it, but it makes some sense. So no doubt about it. So you don't move 3,000 people 400 kilometers in 5.5 hours by the seat of your pants. You do it because there's a good plan and the plan is executed the best way you can possibly do it. And that's what this staff did. That's what the RCMP helped them to do. And I think, all being said, that went extremely well. One more, there's one more, I'll take one more question. Oh, okay, it looks like the RCMP would like to speak again.
Yeah, Rob, I just want to speak to a couple points. First, the traffic control. I agree with the speaker that it is a concern. I agree with your comments that we would expect a high level of courtesy and understanding from all the residents, but it needs to be known that in a dynamic, fast-moving situation like this, my members on the ground had a number of priorities, the first and foremost being the public safety, the safety of all persons in the community. We had limited resources on the ground to start, which would not provide us the opportunity to take care of every police-related requirement. Again, public safety was first and foremost. And I want to speak to the comment that was made about us bugging out of the community. That to me reads or sounds like we only had our interests as RCMP members and families. That is the farthest thing from the truth. I had members on the ground that were working 24, 36 hours straight shifts in ensuring the safety of everyone in that community. People chose not to leave. There was an order in place. That's on them. We've given them informed information as to their decision-making. My members on the ground did an amazing job in doing everything they could to make that community safe. And again, ultimately, it was my decision that once the trigger point had been met and the south egress was in jeopardy, there is nothing that I'm going to do differently in ensuring their safety and well-being. So I understand property crime incidents happen, but nothing will supersede their safety. To say that we bugged out is the farthest thing from the truth without doing everything we could to ensure public safety.
Canadian Rangers not asked to assist. Okay, Brian, there's a question here about the Canadian Rangers and why they weren't asked to assist. My understanding is that's a request that needs to be made by the RCMP.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear the question there. So our policy, our agreement with the armed services is that we cannot at the local level request and deploy the Rangers. That has to come from the military personnel themselves. We can put in a request, but it comes from them solely. We cannot go directly to the Rangers and request their assistance without going through the higher echelon and managers of the armed forces. Sorry, Rob, if you're got a question for me, I can't hear you.
Requests were made for the Rangers.
Sorry, the question is still why was the request not made?
They heard your response with respect to the Rangers, and the follow-up question was there ever a request for the Rangers?
Okay, so I'm going to defer that to Inspector Aaron Sproul. He's one of our senior commanders for the fire, our response. So I'm going to defer that to him. I believe Aaron's on the line here.
Hi there, can you hear me okay? Sure, I just want to make sure that the group can hear me here. It's Aaron Sproul. Perfect, thanks. Yeah, the process to request the Canadian Rangers was outlined by Chief Superintendent Emmons. So the request is made at the local level. The RCMP will typically advance a request through our lines, and it has to come with the support of our commanding officer here in headquarters, then across to the armed forces and their headquarters at JTFP. In this case specifically, I know I'm not aware that a request specific to the Canadian Rangers was made, but as was pointed out, the response was very, the evacuation order was very quick, and I know I didn't receive a request for the Rangers, my point, And it's my understanding that given the speed with which the evacuation needed to occur and the total engagement of all the RCMP members there in that effort, that they were focused on the priority being the evacuation of the community. And as such, the request of the Rangers would have been delayed through process and likely not have resulted in adequate deployment. But I'll have to leave that to North District to speak to.
Yeah, Rob, it's Brian here again. So just to add to Aaron's comments, it was my understanding that by early in the hours, I believe on the morning of the 13th, or I could be wrong, the 12th, that over 90% of the evacuation had occurred. Thus, we didn't require the assistance of the Rangers, but it's always certainly an option that we have available to us.
Do not do security work. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Rob. I only caught a bit of your question, but the military, be it through the Rangers, do not do any type of security work within the community. That remains for us.
One of these questions offline here. So two of them together, I think the wildfire service should be able to speak to these. Could somebody explain why the fixed wing aircraft wasn't used as much as the helicopters? I'm getting some questions as to why fixed wing bombers weren't used. And then what is the role of the WCB in the wildfires? Is the majority of your workers there?
So fixed wing tankers are used generally during initial attack to either suppress the forward movement of the fire or to help steer the fire in a certain direction. They're not as effective on a large scale fire after it's sort of gone to that expanded attack stage. It's more effective to use heavy equipment, helicopters, and ground crews. There's a misconception that air tankers put out fires. They do not put out fires. They simply assist the ground crews in slowing down the spread of the fire. So their main use is during initial attack. There are times where we will strategically use them in expanded attack roles, but on the Parker Lake fire, that they weren't required at that time because we had ground crews and sufficient helicopter resources to take care of it. And as for the work safe comment, we have to follow work safe regulations the same as any other business. In particular, fatigue management for our staff. We are human beings as well. We cannot work 24 hours a day through an extended season, and we take great pride in looking after our staff, both their physical and mental health well-being. And it's something that we feel is one of our very strong values, and it helps us retain staff that are experienced in the long term, and then as well that helps us be that much better at fighting fires. So yeah, I don't know what else to add.
Thanks. Okay, question from the floor, please.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. My name is Jenny Ma. I'm a long-term resident of Fort Nelson. I've been here for 48 years. Historical perspective is a wonderful thing. I look at all the individuals and the organizations that were involved in keeping us safe, keeping our homes and our communities safe. And I just have a huge amount of gratitude and respect for every single one of you. 48 years ago in Fort Nelson, you knew there was a wildfire because the RCMP and forestry came into the bars, the restaurants, the hotels, and they conscripted able-bodied men to go out and fight fires. So we have come a long way. Historical perspective will hopefully help us do things better and move forward in the future. I think some really positive comments have been made. I really like Tammy's comment about having a newsletter in the mailbox now that we do not have the Fort Nelson News. I think communication is really important, but again, just a huge shout of gratitude for each and every one of you. I know you've put in really, really long hours, but for the grace of God, we could have been another Maui. We could have been another Lytton. That happened really fast. That happened a very, very short time ago. So a historical perspective can be really, really useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you. I'm going to take two more questions off the floor, and then I've got one on here that I'd like to read out.
Hi, yeah, I'd like to follow up with that. Thanks everybody for the good job you did. I'm just wondering, for the last 100 years, firefighting in North America has largely been reactive. And I'm wondering, have we finally turned the corner where we're going to be more reactive and proactive, more proactive for protecting our communities from fire? I know there's a lot of lip service every year we have a bad fire season. There's a lot of lip service to reducing fuel loads, protecting our communities. And then the next year it's gone. I know there's been a couple little programs around Fort Nelson, but is it going to finally take place where we get more proactive with protecting our communities?
So that's a good question. And the last one I want to read sort of speaks to that and speaks to sort of the wildfire resiliency plan and getting the community together to figure out exactly what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. There has been a few small projects. This one out here was, that the Forest Enhancement BC worked with Community Forest on was over $300,000. It's a huge cost, And we're going to have to decide if that's something we want to download onto ourselves to do, or how we're going to do it, or how we can engage with contractors locally. These are all huge, big questions that I don't have an answer to tonight. But that I sure hope that as we move forward and we pull together this resiliency committee of interested stakeholders and contractors and interested people in the community, that we'll be able to start pulling together a bit of a plan and then trying to figure out how to pay for it. Because we're going to have to pay for it. The province is not going to pay for it. And so, it's easy to say, well, let's just clear cut the community. Someone's got to pay for that. Nobody's going to do that for free. So I want you to think about, and I agree, we need to be more proactive, not just here, but in the entire boreal forest with respect to how we're going to protect our communities moving forward. So one more question, and then I'll read this one because I think it's a good way to end it.
Hi there. I'd just like to know who I would talk to from the front table to my left about danger trees on my property. Okay.
So the fire guys will help you with that.
After the meeting, will.
All right. So I want to read this one because I thought it was well put together, and I think it's a good way to end this, to move forward to what's next. So the comments are, through the efforts of those involved and with a lot of help from the shifting winds, the Parker Lake fire stayed mostly to the south of the Alaska Highway and was kept from the fuels that could have easily brought this into the community. It would appear that the forested area to the northwest of town represents the most dangerous path for fire to reach into the community. The area from Radar Road through Pioneer Way and into the community forest could bring wildfire right up to the homes and build up quite a firestorm in the process. It would seem that the buffalo fields between the new and the old Alaska Highway was helpful in preventing fire spread towards the homes along the old Alaska Highway at mile 304 and 305. Is there any plan to create an agricultural break like that between Pioneer Way and town to stop an approaching fire from that side from building up too much momentum? Although this would not stop an approaching fire completely, it should help in slowing it down considerably and give structural protection a chance to save homes. A second area of concern is the gasoline alley. At some point, there was worry that the fire could jump the river and get into gasoline alley area, and there is obviously concern about that. A lot of properties in that area have become overgrown with brush and grasses. There is also a fair bit of abandoned scrap lumber that could be fuel for a fire. Should these properties not be cleaned up to stop wildfire from getting too close to the fuel stores? Are they continuing to make fire breaks, or has this project been considered completed? So those are the exact type of comments that as we move forward, those are the exact type of ideas that our fire resiliency committee should be looking at. You know, some of that is low hanging fruit, won't cost a lot. The idea about around the gasoline alley and taking care of some of the high grass and fuel loads and old wood that's kicking around out there. Those are great ideas. Those are the types of things that I think we want to see, you know, as we move forward in the next, you know, months and years, because it will take that long. It will take that long. I guess the last question is, are there any permanent structure protection that remains in place? That's for you. So there's no structural protection, that's permanent structure protection that's remaining in place. It's all been pulled down. We still have our unit, our trailer. I think it's been put back ready to go. So since that, so we still have that unit that we purchased this year. So I think that's all of them. I just again want to put that plug in that if you're interested in what the fire resiliency plan will look like moving forward, you know, please come forward as we start building up that committee, hiring that new coordinator to help us with that, and to help people understand and work on the BC Fire Smart programs in their own. You know, the idea of fuel mitigation around the community is only one part of trying to protect wildfires from coming into our community. So we are in an effort to move this forward. This is not the end. And, you know, I just can't say enough that this is going to be a long summer. You know, don't unpack your RV and don't unpack your 3-day jump kit. Be prepared and be ready. So I want to thank all the presenters. I want to thank all the local contractors and volunteers who helped, you know, in those hours. I want to thank all the businesses that helped out. I know that some of the businesses handed over keys to their business as they evacuated the community and said, use what you need to use. You know, and that doesn't happen in very many communities. And you know, I wear that as a badge of honor that our community is like that and trusted our council and our staff with that responsibility, and other contractors. Some keys were handed over to other contractors. So, you know, hopefully everybody is made whole. Hopefully we'll be able to help those people who have lost property and lost homes, to help them renew their lives. And again, all of you, for the job that you did and the common sense that you showed when you left the community in such a rush in 6.5 hours on a Friday night with no notice. Nobody was hurt, and everybody got back to the community without any injuries. So thank you all, and good night.